I remember a sense of, kind of a dual sense of we've arrived in that sense and we're here, and then also a sense of, and now we can get on with what the Lord has for us here.
Well, hello and welcome to the Cornerstone Church 10 Years of Thankfulness Podcast. Cornerstone has, of course, existed as a church for many more years than 10 years, but this podcast is all about what God has done in and through the ministries of the church as we celebrate 10 years in our home here on Castle Boulevard, very close to the heart of the city of Nottingham. In this episode, we're going to be exploring some of the building blocks of the last 10 years, the vision of this building and building this building as a resource for God's mission here in Nottingham to reach all nations and the next generation with the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm delighted today to be joined by John Russell, and who's our lead minister here at Cornerstone. And also we're joined by Paul Couchman, who's one of our elders. John, just briefly tell us about yourself, your role, and how God led you to where he's placed you now.
Hi Phil, thank you. Yeah, well, I came to Nottingham back in the last millennium, actually. So in 1999, I came to Nottingham as a student, and my cousin Richard and his wife Jane were part of the church and still are part of the church. So they brought me along on the first Sunday to Cornerstone, and I've been around ever since. And I joined the staff team in 2007 as a minister in training, and then in 2015 I became the lead minister.
Great. And Paul, tell us about yourself. You're an elder here at Cornerstone, but particularly about your role during the years where we were building this building. What did you do and how did you end up there?
Yep, so we've been in Nottingham since 2000, so similar sort of time we moved to Nottingham. But from 2008 to the end of 2012, I was building project manager. Started kind of fairly small and informally to start with when we first got going, and then eventually took on that role full time. I think all the way through that time was kind of encouraging the church to find somebody that actually had done a building project before and knew what they were doing, but in the end handed over the keys sort of in September 2012 and stayed on a little bit more just to make sure that everything worked. And I've been an elder since about, I think it was 2009, 2010 as well.
Brilliant. I should probably introduce myself. I'm Phil. I'm on the team at Cornerstone as well. And I arrived as a student in 2007. And I think one of the first Sundays that I was at Cornerstone at the school where we used to meet was when the church found out the news that their home for kind of 20 years or so they were going to have to move and find somewhere else to be. Can you remember that Sunday and what that was like? It was kind of a bit perplexing coming into, something's about to change here. But what was it like for people who were part of the church family at that time?
Well, I remember thinking, this is a big problem for them to sort out, thinking them being the leadership or some sort of mythical people that were going to sort all this out. Little did I know what plans God had got for me. But I think there was a sense that I think the church for a little while had been sort of half thinking about a building project, but it was never really in the forefront of the church's minds. There was so many other things going on, and we were comfortable and happy in the school. We had a good relationship with the school. We were using the building really well. There was great, facilities available to us, and so it was never really a top priority for us. And we felt, that it was something that we'd probably get round to at some point. So I think it brought a sense of real clarity and, actually the clock is ticking now. I think Peter at the time described it as the crack of the starting pistol or something along those lines. And I think it was very much that, and it sort of brought everything into sharp focus, and actually, prompted us to some serious prayer and seeking the Lord for his guidance as well.
Yeah. What about for you, John? Those time, how did you see the Lord's hand, in that season when we were just embarking on what the building project might look like?
Yeah. And at that time, I was a minister in training, so I didn't have a huge amount of responsibility either within the building project or in church life in general. So I was kind of observing things, but part of things as well. And I think seeing how it resulted in some serious prayer in the church, and some great prayer meetings, and lots of kind of discernment and thinking things through, seeking the Lord, some very sacrificial giving as well, and also clear vision. So Peter gave a really clear vision of what he sensed the Lord was leading us into, and what we were to seek and ask the Lord for. And I can remember sitting in a staff meeting when Peter and Valerie and Spencer and Colin, presumably maybe others as well, just had a meeting with the school where it was made clear to us that we weren't going to be able to continue to meet there in the medium to longer term. And as they came back from that meeting, I suppose reality sunk in to an extent, but also, this was the start of something new, and something had to change, and to see a sense of excitement as well about how the Lord was going to answer these prayers and what he was going to do, and a sense of privilege of being part of that. And that, thinking, I can remember sitting in that meeting thinking, God is going to answer this prayer somehow in the coming years. It's going to be fascinating to see what he does. And then in the years past since we've moved in here, and sitting thinking, this building and all that happens within it was the answer to many of those prayers, and therefore that gives you encouragement as we think about what's next in the life of the church, and that has helped for some of the big changes that we've been part of in the last 10 years, to give us confidence to have faith that the Lord's with us if we're obeying his will.
So for you, Paul, kind of your involvement kind of really ramped up in 2008. But even before that, I think you were kind of beginning to take more of a kind of leadership responsibility within the church and helping us drive things forward. Map out, what was that journey like, and what happened next?
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to this. I think, and what you'll find whenever you talk to anybody was around at the time and is still here, there's a very personal journey that most people can describe, how the Lord laid, whether it was a prompt to give more than they'd ever thought they was possible, or whether it's just ways in which they were able to serve. We started by looking for land. I remember various interesting visits to various places, and we sort of started. I mean, it's interesting to think that of the sort of 4 to 5 years of the project, only the last 9 months were the actual building bit. Everything else leading up to that was seeking land, going through all the planning permission and the purchase, and all of the sort of kind of fairly mundane type of stuff, but really essential lead up to that. Just lots and lots of challenges, a lot of engagement with the church, just trying to navigate through the uncertainty and seeking the Lord, as well as all of us wrestling with, well, what does that mean for me? Do I really think that this is the right thing to do? Could we not just divide up and rent somewhere? All sorts of different things we were trying to look at. But as John said, there was a real sense of conviction within the leadership of the church and within the church as a whole, that the vision for a centre for worship for generations to come was very much at the heart of that.
Anytime I talk about what I do and where I work in the city to people who aren't from Cornerstone, and they always say, "Oh yeah, I know Cornerstone. How on earth did you afford that? You must be a church full of millionaires and all sorts." Is that something that you've been asked before?
Always the first question that most people ask me, whether that be people from other churches or people who just, as you say, just sort of look from the outside at the building or whatever. And the answer I give every time is very simple. People gave as the Lord prompted them. Everybody did their part. There was no one underlying benefactor. It wasn't sort of bankrolled by a millionaire or anything like that. Everybody from first year students, like yourselves, right up through to people in their retirement years. Everybody gave and supported in prayer and in all sorts of different ways throughout that time, and are still, many still giving. But it was all prompted by the vision. People didn't give specifically to a building. We didn't have land or a site or planning permission or any of those things before we'd raised a substantial amount of money. We gave because we believed that the Lord would answer prayer and honour the vision that we felt He'd given us. So we had to take a step of faith, in that sense. But the church did. God miraculously worked. There's no other. I look back and I think, how on earth did we end up where we are, given one, the person that He kind of put to coordinate, who'd never done one before or since, significant eye-watering amounts of money in one sense, looking at it in one way, but actually when you break it up bit by bit, everybody doing their part, and I think it's just a great picture of the way that the Lord uses His people together with His guiding hand to achieve His purposes.
Yeah. What were some of your reflections over those years of the building project, how the Lord was working in that time?
I think giving us in the church at the time faith for something that's probably be one of the biggest, or at the time we probably thought it'd be one of the biggest things in that we would be part of from a kingdom point of view in our lives, and very significant. I think since then the Lord's continued to surprise us with other things that He's given us opportunity to be involved with. But I think that's how He works. And I think on the seeing the Lord's sovereignty is a huge thing. So even in the finances of the building, it's far more than that. But even in the finances, so yes, we began the project in the middle of a global financial crisis. In some respects, the worst time to begin a massive multi-million pound building project. But in other ways, it meant that the site that we're on became available at a price that was much lower than it would have been had we tried to buy it in years past. It meant were we to build this building now, it cost a significant amount more than it did at that point as well, for lots of different reasons. So the Lord's sovereignty and the timing of all of that, and enabling us to trust Him, and just that continued giving at the time, but also since, as the mortgage that we have continues to be repaid. So it's something like about £10,000 every month is given to from people in the church to continue to pay the mortgage, and the mortgage stands at about £800,000, I think, something like that at the moment. And we hardly ever mention that. We need to, because it does need to be continue to be paid off and continue to be funded. But just that sacrificial level and kind, generous level of giving from so many different people, and in so many different ways. I remember a dear lady called Jill who baked cakes and sold them, and that was a blessing to everyone, and sold them to give the money to the building. Probably significant number, probably the chairs we're sitting on and many of the chairs that are around were probably funded by Jill's delicious cakes. And so many people in so many different ways played their part, and the Lord honoured that.
Yeah, that was great. And to think here we are September 2022. 10 years ago we landed in the building. It's easy to fast forward through that journey, but Paul, there were twists and turns along the way, weren't there?
Yeah, there was so many memories. I think there's the personal stories that people have, but also I do look back on it with fondness. I think at the time I probably was a lot more scared about things than I am in hindsight. But I remember, trips to nightclubs with the ministry team. That was one particular interesting day. I remember, graffiti on site, travellers occupying the site just before we bought it. I remember trips to the council planning offices. I remember what perceived to be setbacks at the time, with the council rejecting the initial plans, but actually we ended up with a far better design. Again, the Lord's sovereignty in that area. I remember being the first time I saw the tea and coffee bar being made and the introduction of, Cornerstone Pink as we call it now. Actually, I think its official title is Sexy Pink. I'm not sure it's good to have Sexy Pink for the first thing you see as you walk through the church. I remember the wall outside being rebuilt 3 or 4 times, and standing behind our site manager as he told a rather large bricklayer that he had to take it apart and do it again 3 times.
Yes.
I remember caves. I remember making a baptistry out of cardboard boxes to try and illustrate what it would look like. Just so many fond memories, as well as all the sort of the meetings that went on behind the scenes. It's quite sad, but I have kept all of the documents and things, partly because it's just amazing to look back at how the Lord brought us through that. And with no prior experience, that is quite staggering, really. Definitely not the model that you would put in the textbook, I don't think. But then God's never been one to follow a textbook, has he? So
there was never a dull moment.
That is true.
But God was with us all the way. Yeah. It's amazing to think how many people were actually part of physically building the building, be it, workmen, architects, all the people. Actually, somebody at Cornerstone recently said to me that they went up into their loft in their house that they're renting, and they found the hard hat of somebody, and it said, Bob, September 2012, Cornerstone Church.
Yeah.
And I just love that,
We just make you wonder where the rest of him is.
He's left his hat here.
Hopefully we won't find anybody in the loft here, but yeah.
That is funny. Yeah. John, what about that kind of first Sunday in the building? As we kind of fast forward through, there's a whole other episode we could have on the kind of highs and lows of the building, and maybe we should do that. But that first Sunday coming into the building, it was an afternoon service. What was the kind of sense and feeling from you, and you kind of observed from others in the church of being here, finally here?
Yep. I think I've been here for a few hours beforehand, as I often am, on Sundays, and it would have been a marathon, a half marathon Sunday as well. So I think I perhaps came to watch the marathon, and then I think people came around the building as well, and then we had a service, and I remember a sense of kind of a dual sense of we've arrived in that sense, and we're here, and then also a sense of, and now we can get on with what the Lord has for us here in this next chapter. The auditorium even then was pretty full, because pretty much everyone who was in the church and a few others wanted to come to that service. So I can remember I played some role in the service, and obviously Peter and Valerie were leading, and Peter spoke, and I can remember Peter turning to me and saying, "We're nearly full already," And that was both exciting and a sense of response. But so exciting in the sense of, yes, we've arrived here, but this isn't the end of the story. This isn't the culmination of it. It's all that happens in here and from here in the future, and being obedient to the Lord.
And that was really clear, wasn't it, in the vision for what we were doing in building this building. Peter was crystal clear on that, for 100 years of gospel ministry and mission, a home for a mission. And, that verse from the Psalm 78 was it, we will tell the next generation, which we've still got. And it's very much still a very key verse, thinking about children yet to be born who were, the families were represented in the congregation who are now, part of our youth ministry, or even those who've been sent out to university, to other churches, to the nations. Actually, the Lord has been very kind and has done a lot of that work here already. Did you have anything to add on that first Sunday?
I just remember it being just a real sense of thankfulness to God, and a sense that everybody, like I said, everybody had played their part, and it genuinely felt like we'd moved into the family home, that we'd all played a part in, and were so full of anticipation for what the Lord was going to do. I think for me, probably the most significant thing in terms of the whole project was actually securing this land itself. What we're sitting on here is a plot of land in a university city that is dedicated to the proclamation of the hope of the gospel, and everything flows from that. This is just the brown paper and string, as Peter used to describe it. And he's right. This is just a tool for the use. And I think everybody felt a sense of, it's a bit like when you run a marathon, not that I ever have. But if
you've heard,
so I hear. You can sometimes take quite a long time just to get to the start line, and it felt a little bit like that. There was quite a lot of effort to get to, and we were at the start line of a lot of things that perhaps we've already started to see and be grateful to God for. But I do remember it being joyful, a little emotional.
Definitely.
But,
yeah, absolutely. And thinking about the last 10 years that we've been in the building, Cornerstone has grown significantly in kind of number, but also in scope and mission and everything else. A lot has happened here, and we've had transition of leadership from Peter Lewis, our senior minister at Cornerstone, for over 40 years. How did you see the Lord's hand in that as one of the key moments of kind of transition of leadership, John? Which can be a bumpy road, I know, for churches. Yeah. How did you see that map out?
Yeah. God was very, very kind to Cornerstone in the way that the senior leadership of the church transitioned. So, and Peter and Valerie had observed around the country and elsewhere some leadership transitions that had gone well and some that had gone disastrously badly, and they had committed that when they handed over the baton, they would hand over really well, and they did that absolutely brilliantly. Peter and I did an interview with the FIC, which is available online somewhere, that talks more about how that kind of actually happened, and I'm sure we can put that in the notes or whatever. But God was so kind to us in that Peter and Valerie were absolutely brilliant in the way that they handed on the baton, in the way that and that they let go of the baton as well. Not all senior leaders do that, particularly after such a long time and such a faithful and fruitful ministry. And the staff and the elders were really supportive and set a context in which I could lead alongside others, and then the church were really supportive as well, and all of that kind of those conditions surrounded by God's love and kindness have made that a leadership transition that God was very kind in, and I think that's been for the blessing of his people, myself included. And it's only really when I'm asked about how that transition went that I'm forced to think back and think how thankful we are, because we almost take it for granted. And I don't mean that sound badly. It's just a reflection of our thankfulness to the Lord and to Peter and Valerie and to his people here.
And a testimony that they could stay within the congregation.
Absolutely,
and, Peter right until his death earlier this year, and Valerie's still with us. And it was a joy to have them, as our kind of, it felt like as our cheerleaders, kind of encouraging us on. And on just wonderful testimony to that. But the ministries and the staff team have grown over these years. Things have changed. Paul, what are some of your highlights as we've been in here in the last 10 years?
I'd probably categorise it in two different sort of categories, I think. Like I said before, it's a family home in one sense. And so every baptism, every child Thanksgiving, every Sunday gathering, every wedding, all of those things are a reminder that we are a family of God's people, and there are points in your family's life that you celebrate. I've been privileged to see both my kids baptised here and my son was married here. So, that's particularly special for me. But I think, so there's that side of things, just the family of God gathering together in one place, encouraging each other regularly, week by week, in all sorts of different ways. That just thrills me to see the building full throughout the week in all sorts of different ways. I get so much joy from that, I think, because you think back to what, the days where there was nothing here and we didn't know what was going on, and you look at it now and all of the different ministries that flourish as a result of that. It's just thrilling to think, to be part of that. The other side to that then is how the building's been used to bless the city and the country. It's been a privilege to be here when there's been conferences and gatherings. So wonderful to hear from people who've organised conferences just how warmly welcome we as a church have made them, how the facilities help them to do their ministry. And that was definitely a part of the vision. It wasn't just something that we wanted to be self-indulgent and feather our own nest. It was something we wanted to put to good use, put to work, to bless the city, the country, international conferences, and all sorts of things that have happened here, all supported by a really dedicated staff team who don't get, they do a lot of great work behind the scenes, day in, day out, just managing and organising all of that. I'm sure the building's starting to show its age, and I'm sure, we take a lot of things for granted, that need repairing and replacing and updating, and that's continued to go on, over these last 10 years. All of that is just bearing fruit in so many ways, and it's personally thrilling and encouraging to think, to have been a part of that. But I think it reinforces the encouragement for the whole of the church as well. It's just great.
Yeah, it's good to see the building being used, isn't it? Somebody told me when I was starting out in youth ministry, if you're not changing the carpets every 10 years, you're not doing it right. So it is, as you say, a kind of a tool, a shed. It's sort of quite a nice one, and we're thankful for it. But it is just a tool. What about you, John, as you think about some of those highlights? It's difficult to put your finger on them sometimes, but what about for you?
Yeah, I think having the opportunity to plant what became Redeemer Church that began in 2017, and sending a significant number of people, 80 adults, 30, 40 children to plant that church on the west of the city, and then for that church to become independent in the fullness of time and to have its own building project, which as we speak now they've just recently moved into. So that's wonderful to see. And also for Cornerstone and those of us that remained here, that the church has continued to grow and replenish. The flour and the oil didn't run out in line with what we believe that prophetic word that was spoken at the time. So all of that was, I think, a real highlight of the last 10 years, and hopefully, something that in different ways we'll be able to continue to do in the future as the Lord leads and provides. And I think in more recent years, the last couple of years, moving to 3 Sunday services from 2, again enabling us to for more people to come hear the good news about Jesus and learn how to follow him. Again, that's just seeing how the Lord has provided in that has been amazing, and how his people have served in so many different ways to make that happen.
But the flip side of that, obviously, is those are the things that we want to remember. Is there anything we want to forget? There's been challenges. There's been lowlights along the way, in the world, even in the last couple of years with the climate and the way things have been. Is there anything that you can recognise? That was hard. That was a challenge.
I think for anybody leading any church through the pandemic and all that entailed, had its challenges. And I think to go from meeting on a Sunday, we'd just moved to 3 Sunday services at that point. I think we'd had 3 of them, and then the first lockdown came, and I can remember, all of the staff were back working at home. I can remember you turning up on my door with a microphone and a stand and trying to explain to me how to use it.
What do I do with this?
I'm not the most technological. So that was probably a traumatic experience for you. Sorry about that, Phil. And then we're eventually able to come back into recording the building and so on. And so thankful for all the tech team that sorted that out, and so many decisions that we had to lead on quite quickly, so many operational things that we had to make decisions on and changes as we came back into the building, but socially distanced, and then how you're doing ministry in that context. So that was an unexpected challenge, but having the privilege of our own building to be able to do that in was huge for us to be able to get back to gather safely, and enabled us to do quite a lot actually, and having our own premises for that, on our own car park as well, an outside space. That was a real privilege.
Seeing God's faithfulness through all of that, and even in the worst of times, if you like, that there's been fruit and that that people have grown in the faith, people have come to faith, and it wasn't just that life was on pause or ministry was on pause. God was working through that. What about you, Paul? Anything that kind of stands out to you that's more of a challenge?
I think similar, in the context of a building and a building project, what was a great asset suddenly became a liability. You've got something that you're having to maintain and look after, but you can't use. That was difficult. I think, as well as obviously, as John says, all the leadership challenges of just keeping the church gathered. I think, if anything, one of the things to reflect on is that it just kind of reminded us of the privilege that we've got of being able to gather. I think the challenges perhaps that we start to face is that we're very visible, and with that comes really great opportunities, but also potential for opposition, and being prominent means that you are a target for opposition of all sorts. We perhaps in the past could have hidden away in the corner of a suburb of Nottingham. One of the things we wanted to be was visible, to be that sort of city on a hill, witness in the community, and the community here being our city. So that comes with its own challenges as well. I think increasingly so in our culture right now. And well, as John was reminding us, even this Sunday, we've got to think about how we engage with that culture. We can't just withdraw, draw up the drawbridge and hide. Equally, we can't let things affect what we hold to be true and essential for the gospel. So, those are challenging things for us, I think, not just now, but as we look ahead as well.
And we were a church for like 20 years where, we had to set things up and pack them away on a Friday, set it up and pack it down. And I think it took us a little bit of time to adjust to kind of doing church in a different way, and not having some of the kind of regular, even the camaraderie of like putting out chairs and tidying up things. And that looked different. There's still plenty of chairs to put out here, but it looked different for a while afterwards. And we had to kind of find our feet in, we've got teams to manage, people to bring on and encourage as they serve as well. Can you kind of put your finger on one thing that being in the building has impacted for kind of ministry? Any doors that you feel like being physically in the building has opened?
I think one of the big things for us, which is not something that we sought actually, but we're in a very prominent location, and we didn't seek that, but it's what the Lord gave us. So we're on a main road into the city. Thousands of people probably drive past or go past on the bus or on the bike or on those electric scooters now as well. And there are some very strategically placed traffic lights just outside, so people have to stop and look up and say, "Oh, that's a modern building, that's a church." And if they, particularly on a Sunday, if they stop there, they'll see throngs of people coming in, people very, very different from one another as well, a real delightful mix of people entering in the building. And so I think that's brought some people back to church, some people who are just curious and never been in the church before at all, and some people who are new to the city perhaps and looking for a church. So God has given us that prominence, which isn't something that we saw. It's certainly not something that we had where we used to meet, and not something we sought, but something the Lord has given us, which I think has been significant for people coming to the Lord and people walking with him if they choose to settle at Cornerstone, and all the other things and that it's the building is things are happening in the building every day of the week, and different things. But I think that's been when we look at all the different events, all the different meetings, all the different gatherings, formal, informal, that happen throughout the course of a term, for example. What the church has been able to do and be part of has multiplied massively in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Same question for you, Paul.
Yeah, I think perhaps opportunities to serve for folk within the church that perhaps weren't there before. when the building is available during the week, that means that people who perhaps struggle to serve on Sundays, which was really the Sundays and Fridays were primarily the two times that we were in the school for youth ministry and Sunday, opportunities to serve kind of within the building during the week. That's opened up opportunities. I think we've seen people who have kind of come to the fore. Gifts have been unlocked and been able to be used tremendously, whether that be in the welcome team, or in some of the more practical side of things, or just in new ministries that have opened up. I mean, I remember going way back in our Connect group. This is before we even knew about the building site, but we were starting the project. I remember somebody saying, wouldn't it be great if we could do an English language school? And I'm praying for that.
Wow.
Now we've got more people subscribed and coming to that than we know what to do with, and it's a real growth ministry, and it's tremendous opportunities, and that's opened up opportunities for people to serve in that area. And that was, an answer to prayer, but also an opportunity that we wouldn't have been able to do, that's both serving the city but also introducing people to Jesus. And I think that's just one example. There's loads of others, of course.
Amazing. Well, final question as we kind of reflect on the last 10 years. I think it also drives us to think about the next 10. What is your prayer as you look ahead to the next 10 years of Cornerstone Church?
Well, I think as we reflect, that we realise that the Lord has given us so much in people, in resources, in these facilities, in blessing, in unity, lots of different things. And for a number of years now, and I've shared this with the church on a number of occasions, I sense that the Lord has given us a kingdom ambition, is that phrase that has come to mind, and you can see it on that behind us. Kingdom ambition, and I think for me that's best encapsulated for the future in having kingdom ambition to gather, kingdom ambition to give, kingdom ambition to grow, and kingdom ambition to go. And so we'll be filling out the details of what we believe that and the Lord is leading us into in all of that in the coming months. But those four G's, gather, to give, to grow, and to go. I believe that's what the Lord is asking of us and has given to us, and will give us the faith for as well. So,
really exciting to watch this space as well. With that, what about you, Paul?
Fifth G.
Here we go.
Oh, wow.
Generations, I think, is something that springs to mind. It's interesting. I was reflecting when we were thinking about this that we moved here in September 2012. Just after the Olympics in London, and I remember the Olympic torch came past the site just a few months before we were due to open, and there was a lot of talk at the time about the legacy of the London Olympics and what's the legacy that's been left by that. And there's a number of different things that people will point to, but I think in our context, what's the legacy? It's a generational legacy, and I'm hugely encouraged by the next generation of leaders, of young people going to serving the Lord and being faithful to their Lord in the school and if they go to university or in the workplace, and I think perhaps it's an age and stage thing for me, maybe where I'm at, but I think the content, the idea of that ambition being something that spans generations. We always felt as part of this project that this was something that we were doing not for us but for future generations. So I think in the next 10 years we will see another generation of leaders, of people serving, of new believers coming into the kingdom. All of the things that John talked about in terms of kingdom ambition, it's for generations as well. And I think that plus, by the sounds of it, new carpet, new boilers, and various other things that are all going to start to wear out, and we'll be reminded of some of the downsides of having a building as well as the upsides, But I think that for me was something that I'll be looking forward to.
That's really exciting.
Try not to think about how old I'll be in 10 years' time as well.
Let's not go there. Don't worry. Well, I'd love to turn some of those points to prayer as we close, and just spend some time thanking God for his building and his people, remembering that the church is bigger than just physical space. It's about the people of God and gathered to kind of prepare their hearts to serve and to live out there in the world as well. So let's commit these things to the Lord. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you so much for your work. Thank you that this was your work through your people to bring about this church building. And Lord, thank you that this is just one chapter even in the story of Cornerstone Church, that we've been able to reflect on these last 10 years. And as we've done that, we've just seen so many points for praise and thanks to you. Thank you for your generosity to us, your kindness to us, for leading us and preserving and protecting us from things which could have been much more challenging than they were. And Lord, thank you also that you've led us to have a vision for what is to come. And so, Lord, would you prepare our hearts? Would you prepare our people? Would you prepare us in every way for what you have ahead of us? And Lord, thank you that you are indeed raising up the next generation to lead and to serve and to go. And Lord, would you help us to do all of those things, not for our own glory, but for your glory alone. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.